Hey guys, Jason here, and today we're going to be doing a track guide. Try a little bit of a new video for me. It's inspired by Patrick at B Squared, and the track we're going to be looking at today is Mosport DDT. So this is a pretty special track for me. It was actually the first track I've ever taken any car on. Back in what was it? I think it was 2014 with Hanson. And since then, it's kind of been the benchmark track for me to go to. I try to go at least once or twice a year just to see how I'm improving as a driver and how the car is also improving with the setup. Let's go ahead and take a look at the satellite view of the track just to get a quick understanding of what the layout is like. What you'll notice right off the bat is actually it's quite condensed, quite tight. There's not really a lot of straights in the 17 corners that are here. You basically have one front straight in the section here that's decently fast, and another one that you get a little bit more run up the back straight here as well. Everywhere else, it's really quite technical. You're stringing corners together. There's quite a bit of a flow. But what's quite fun about DDT is that there's quite a bit of elevation, right? You're going to experience a bit of a drop here. You're going to experience quite a bit of a downhill here. And then in the back kink, you're going to actually experience some uphill climbs, which is really going to impact what you can expect out of braking. Actually, you can use some of the topography to your advantage, or it could be a disadvantage, right, when you're going downhill. So yeah, with that, let's get into the track guide itself. All right, so here we are just about to set off on a hot lap of Mosport DDT. Before we play the video, a little bit about the car that you're going to be seeing. So this is a FRS supercharged with the Jackson Racing C38 kit. It is on 255 with RE71Rs, and it has quite a bit of aero. So one thing that you'll want to take note of is if you're comparing this to more of a stock FRS, it's going to be a little bit quicker down the straights, and it's going to be able to carry quite a bit more speed through some of the fast corners. But other than that, the driving lines itself is going to be quite similar to what you can expect from a stock car. And if there's any differences, I'll make sure to kind of note them as we go through. So why don't we get started with going down the front straight here. Now, what you can see with the front straight turning into turn one is, over here, you're basically blind as to where the turn in and where the exit is going to be in 1A, B, and C, that little chicane complex. And what I find is you can't really expect these cones to be here for every single track day. Some organizers will put them out. Some organizers will skip them, and even if they are out, they could be placed in completely different spots, right? So I have had even times where I kind of scan this grassy area to see if there's like a weed that's sticking out, or look for some tire marks as a better reference. But usually what ends up happening for turn one is you just build up your confidence throughout the day in finding the right braking point and the turn in, because as you'll see, when we play the video, it comes at you pretty quickly, right? So you do want to get pretty close to the curbing here on turn one. I've actually found that when I play back the footage and actually take a look at some photographs, that I actually take this curb pretty aggressively. And it just, you feel like you're only touching it, kind of riding it up gently without hitting the bump stops on the front or the rear. But what ends up happening as you build confidence is that you actually do take these curves pretty aggressively. And as you go through this corner, they call this, I think, 1B, 1C as corners, but realistically, once you make it through 1A, this is like the true corner that you're hitting. Once you get through and you're moving forward, this is almost like a straight shot through, where realistically it's more like touching the curb and you're kind of going straight through and getting the car to get pretty close to the edge of the track on the inside here as well, before smoothly kind of just going out towards the track out there. So let's move forward. Yeah, so this is kind of the corner, the end of the curbing that you're aiming for, just to smoothly. You don't even have to touch it if it doesn't feel right in terms of how the car is progressing through the corner, and then track out. Now, setting up for turn 2, this is where there's some differences in approach, because this entire corner section, it's a huge corner. There are a few viable lines to go through, and as you learn the track, you're gonna try different things. This is also one of those corners where, as I progress through the day, I'm just getting more comfortable in terms of finding what is the right braking point, what is the right turn in, because again, you're not gonna have too many stable reference points. So I'm just gonna clear that. And one difference I've found through time is, back when I first started tracking here, I would kind of hug the line here, where you actually see that the surface texture is different on the left versus the right. The paving is different. It's nice and smooth over here, and it's quite textured on this side. There's more loose pebbles and things like that. But what I found is, when I first started tracking here, I would go up this line, go a little bit deeper, brake, and turn it in. It's actually faster to come out a little bit to whatever you're comfortable with, closer to the wall. Brake a little bit earlier than you would if you were going deep and more of a sharper turn, to now have a slight bend and a more gradual turn, so kind of reducing the angle of the steering that is required to make it, and increase the radius of the turn, if you will. So if we watch this through, I'm going to come out and turn in, and what you're aiming for is, ideally you want to aim for this pylon, or where this pylon would be, depending on how it's been set up for your track day. Alternatively, kind of like visualizing the end of the stripping here, right? So it is a little bit of a later apex than what you might expect when you first come into it. And what's going to happen here is actually you're going to be climbing uphill, right? So once you've touched in a major apex, you're immediately looking up the hill. All right, if I fast forward, for essentially the beginning of the edge of the track on the exit side up the hill, and usually there's going to be a pylon there, right? So once we've hit our apex right here, this cone, we're going to start moving up the hill towards the outside here, right? And so through this, you kind of want to have a constant steering. So look at my hands here, don't really move, and just climb up the hill, get back on power right after the exit. Now, approaching this corner here, turn 3, it is a pretty heavy braking zone. Easy to overslow as well. I think with factory cars, you're basically abusing ABS through the section. But we in this layout here, I found, the first cone where it's been set up is where I initiate my braking, go really hard on the brakes, and I think what ends up happening is the turning point I used pretty close to the last cone there, which means turning into this corner. You see the cone here signifying the apex. It's pretty late into the corner where you're going to make that apex. So let's watch that through. All right, so once we've essentially made our apex here, you're essentially right back on gas. In a stock powered FRS, you're actually probably going to be coming back down to second. With the supercharger here, I find that I'm going to gear out if I go to second and go flat, that I just stay in third. I feel like there's enough torque to kind of carry me through this corner. Now, the exit of the corner, I think there may be some differences in opinion. So if you actually watch what I do here, I'm not actually fully tracking out. And the reason why I'm not is I find that, and one, if I track out, there tends to be a lot more marbles just littered on the outside of this, just because of how much of a harsh turn this is. The tires are typically scrubbing. The other reason is my suspension is probably a little bit softer than it should be in terms of spring, and I find that if I go track out all the way, that I can't transition back to the inside to set up for the next turn as smoothly for 4. So what I do is, it's about, call it the 2/3 line, is usually what it ends up being for me in terms of how I felt most comfortable coming out, tracking out, and then moving up the hill on that line. Now, what's interesting about this corner is that there is a cone here. You'd assume that it signifies, this. We think this is the apex. I tend to actually skip that one in favor, even though I get pretty close, I skip it in favor of the edge of the track right about here. I find that that's just a much more natural point to apex, because if you hit this one, it feels like you're going to unwind your steering even more aggressively than I am doing right here, and kind of turn it back in to set up for turn 4. Now, if we watch back this complex just to kind of see it all together, so coming into turn 3, braking hard, turning at the last cone, hit this apex, and avoid this one in favor of the apex here, coming into 4. Now, prioritize getting to the right, and the car really settled, which is why I don't like to track out too far on the left-hand side. I stick to that 2/3 line coming up. Yep, pretty heavy on the braking here, turning in pretty late, using this pylon here, or to be honest, I usually kind of have my sight on the beginning of the curbing here to help me figure out where the turn-in is going to be. And it's a fairly late apex, though. There's gonna be a cone right here that's blocked by my big head. But what I find is midway through the curbing, you're already starting to hug the curb, so you can just kind of keep it tight mid corner, and still be on the curb as you're kind of exiting this corner here as well. And what's gonna immediately follow in this section is you're going to actually want to track out pretty quickly. And the reason why I would recommend tracking out and just letting the wheel kind of come and unwind is you're going to need to do an early shift here. And the reason why you want an early shift is this next corner here, turn 5. If you stay in second, you're going to gear out. And if you try to shift to third mid-corner, that's going to be a pretty good recipe for spinning your car into the grass or worse. So what's going to happen is once you get out, let's rewind here, get out to this side, and I'm basically shifting almost between these two cones. And I think that's supposed to signify kind of your turn-in point usually is around here, right? So get that shift done, and then basically constant radius and holding the steering into this next section, right? A little bit of shuffling just to adjust, adjust, but through this complex, pretty stuck in terms of you're taking a set on your steering and heading to the exit of turn 5. So let's play through. Now, turn 6, this is the one area on this hot lap that I would say don't do exactly what I'm doing. What I'm going to do is brake and kind of turn in pretty close to this pylon, if not a little bit later. I do think you can have a little bit more extra time and pace by easing onto the brake and turning in a little bit earlier into this corner, because it looks tight. Like a lot of corners and DDT, you don't really know what's behind the crest here, but you actually have a decent amount of room. Whereas when I brake later and turn in later, we're a little bit tighter on the turn, which means our mid-corner speeds, our minimum speeds are probably going to be lower. We're not taking that smooth optimal arc through the section. So watch the clip, you'll see that I turn in late. You can turn in a little bit earlier, just to kind of remind yourself to work up to where you think the braking zone should end to the turn-in. So it's probably safer to start with later turn-ins here, and then just slowly ease your way into comfortably doing slightly earlier turn-ins, because you actually do have a lot of track on the exit of this corner. All right, so let's just slowly play that back. You can see I turn in pretty close to that last cone there, and the angle that I turn in at is pretty sharp. Like, I'm not really trusting the car here, and you see that, you know, I was right around here, and now my hand's over here. Means I'm already starting to relax the wheel probably sooner than I needed to, but this is now trying to recover some of that pace, right, by relaxing and try to get back on gas sooner. Whereas, you know, you probably could have come in with a constant turn through this section. The other piece is, as you're going through 6 and 7, you can take this as almost like a double apex single turn. What I've done here is actually, when I hit this cone here, I actually start throwing just a little bit more steering. And I think with a stock-ish FRS, you could probably keep it constant and track out. But what I've prioritized here is actually I'm not allowing my car to get all the way to the outside. Again, reason being, I find that the car is not transitioning fast enough, given the pretty aggressive rear aero, and I'm prioritizing making sure that when I get to the inside turn in for corner 8, that not only am I alongside these cones, but the suspension is also unloaded. It's not in a state of lean or transition, such that when I try to essentially make it go the opposite direction, that it actually digs in, the front grips up and propels the car towards the apex of turn 8 here. And what I'll actually do here is a quick stab of the brakes, and we'll play through here. And that just loads up the front a little bit to make sure that I get a really sharp turn in to turn 8 here. It's possible that if you're more stockish, you can just lift a minor lift to go through here. I have done it where you can stay flat through the turn if you line it up perfectly. But what's going to happen is you're going to end up way on the left on the track out, and there's not enough time to recover to get back onto the inside for turn 9, and you want to prioritize turn 9 because that's going to be leading to a fairly long straight in this section. So let's turn it back here, and then we'll wash through that section. All right, so turn 9, turn in is going to be close to this cone. What you'll actually see is right around here, it's a bit of a hump almost, right? Like, so you're already starting to go downhill, but once you get past right about this line, the grade drops even more, right? So what I would recommend is, like, right before you get there, start your braking, because once you get past that drop, your braking power substantially decreases from gravity working against you in this section, such that a lot of people will go into the grass here. It's fairly safe if you end up in the grass here because, like, there's nothing out there, luckily. Or ABS is gonna just tick lock up here like crazy, and you want to get it to turn into here so you can start getting on the gas as soon as you can for the next complex. So get on the brakes early, and then work your way up to where you think you're basically not going to make this corner, but definitely try to initiate your braking before the track kind of gets away from you in terms of the drop in the grade. So, yep, 9 pretty geometric in terms of the apex, I would say. You can take a decent amount of curb. Obviously, I wouldn't recommend dropping a wheel, because you'll catch the lip depending on how much this is actually filled, and that can change from track day to track day. Take that fairly aggressively so that this section here through turn 10 is fairly straight, right? You want to reduce the amount of turning that you're throwing in, you can pretty much at this point, like once you get the car settled, you're basically flat through this section here, going through to the bottom, almost like a hairpin at the bottom of this. All right. So through this section, try to keep steering fairly constant. It's actually pretty nice as you exit, this corner here on 10, that the rest of the way you kind of keeping it, slight turn to the right throughout the whole thing. Now, as we're approaching corner 11, what I try to aim for is this edge of the track. Line it up such that you're essentially driving through this and aiming for the beginning of the curbing on the outside here. So if we play it forward, right? So this is right before it is going to be your turn-in point for turn 11. So if we kind of go through here, and I would also say once you've hit this, I use this as my braking marker as well. Essentially, like, depending on how fast the car is going, sometimes I feel like, okay, like I actually got a really great line coming out of 10. I may brake right before approaching. So here, let's say 138 kilometers per hour, 139, 140. Yeah, I actually took this braking pretty late this time. So like right after the edge, coming down to 39. And we're going straight for lining it up to the curb, and then right before it, maybe like half a car length, initiate that turn in. And what you're kind of aiming for is this cone here. When I first started here, I would take this apex super late because I was afraid of ending up in the tires on the outside. But interestingly enough, the more aggressive you are, like the later you turn in, and therefore the more angle that you're throwing into the wheel, I found the more likely the rear tires were actually willing to step out just from the weight transfer. Whereas now, I try to hit that apex and get back on gas pretty quickly, but lightly and gently, like ramp up to it. And once you get that apex, like start being prepared to throw in some counter steer if you need to, but like smoothly start to track out the car, smoothly start to unwind that steering wheel as you essentially aim for about where this yellow pylon is. So let's wind that back and look at the turn. Right, so you can tell here the car was feeling a little bit light, such that threw in that counter steer, just a quick jab to settle the car down before essentially getting back wide open throttle for this next section. Turn 12, basically try and line it up. NA powered car on sticky tires, you could basically take this section flat, just drive through the corner. What ended up happening on this track day, actually the track started to delaminate on the entry for turn 13, such that I gave it a bit of a lift just to make sure that I don't track out as far as these cones over here. So we'll see that. All right, so ideally when the track is in good condition, you're actually going to be car is going to be positioned here, and turn 13, so that the back kink, it's uphill. So use that to your advantage when you're thinking about your braking. It's going to help you actually slow down the car. What ends up happening then realistically is, if you have a fairly neutral setup on your car, and this applies to actually a lot of the corners at DDT, is you can actually trail brake partially through this corner without upsetting the car too much. Always recommend to brake in a straight line, and then do turn in when you're just getting started. But then when you're feeling out the comfort of the car, like what I end up usually doing is kind of like braking decently moderate, trail braking to here, and then transition to get back on. And what I found is sometimes I after hitting this apex, I actually have a bit of a moment where I can get back on gas just a little bit to squeeze out that little bit of time. But I'm still experimenting there because it feels a little odd when you can get back on gas. Maybe you're just over slowing the approach, and if I can still get this apex while maintaining a higher minimum speed under braking, such that I don't have a transition of brake to back to gas, and then the downshift to make it into 13B. But let's watch this through. All right, so this downshift as we're getting into 13B is pretty important. I've actually found that through time, I prefer to blip shift this one with just a throttle rev match and not do the heel toe, mainly because the uphill is helping slow down the car. So I find that I'm at the grip limit, just letting the car coast a little bit through this. And though, coasting is never optimal because it always feels like you have some time left on the table because you could have been carrying more speed and therefore need the brakes, or you can be powering through. What I find coasting gives you is a little bit more consistency just through this tiny little bit, because the downshift, if you mess up the rev match on the heel toe, which I find it's really easy to do here because of that uphill slowing you. It's harder to get the right amount of rev. You usually over rev it and just locks up the rear a little bit or unsettles the car. That unsettling of the car can really ruin your momentum through the next section here. And what I usually do now for this section is just hug the curb. And the reason why I say that is just it feels a little bit faster than when I first started tracking a DDT. I would come out maybe mid-track and take it as a late apex so that I can get a nice exit. But I found that on the outside here, you don't have a lot of grip. It may actually be that the camber of the road is working against you in this section, such that the further out you go, the less grip you have. So I found that the best way is actually just to keep it tight on the inside. And what I've also discovered in experimenting here is that the later you stay on the curb, like basically all the way to the end of the curbing, the better setup you have to almost immediately as you exit that, just get back on gas, hit this apex. And because you're starting way wide over here, again, your turning radius is not as tight. You don't have to put in as much steering to get through, not only to touch the apex, but now you have room on the track out to still have the throttle pinned. Back when I was leaving the curb a little bit sooner, like around here mid track, getting it to the apex, I found that was too tight and had to lift so that I don't end up on the grass there, right? So here we are staying extremely tight to the inside of the 13 kink, 13B, and getting back on gas here, and just keeping it pinned. So we'll watch that through now. This section, basically keep that turning fairly steady, right after we exit 13C. Get to the outside, throw in that shift, steering, the hand is still there, and you're basically just keeping it constant. And what you want to do is touch this curb here. Don't need to ride it because you don't want to upset the car. The main reason why you even get close to this curbing is to reduce your track distance, right? You're trying to get this as straight of a line into the final chicane of the track as close as you can. Get through. And this corner here, I believe this is basically the fastest section of the track in terms of like max speed. I'll get to 144 both here and on the front straight because I'm just gearing out at this point. And For me, I find it's faster just to stay in fourth instead of risking to shift to fifth, where, you know, if you downshift, you could over brake on the downshift or upset the car if it's not a smooth transition. So I usually just ride it out in fourth and experiment with the braking again, like every track day, work up to it. I think I start probably initiate at this cone, but you know, you just throughout the day work your way up to it and see what feels good. The turn in here, again, first few times, you really can't see much because the land kind of flattens out, hard to see the apex, hard to see the exits. But it ends up being optimally a fairly late one because you want to string together the chicane, much like the first chicane after the front straight. You can almost go straight through it. The first chicane, you can very much go straight through it. This one a little bit less so, but same principles kind of apply here. So turn in nice and late and take this apex. No need to ride the curb too aggressively. You definitely want to drop your tire because you want the transition of the car to be very predictable because you're immediately going to be up against another curb and then another curb. And I would tell you that when it comes to accidents at DDT, this corner here on the warm-up lap or the first hot lap tends to be the one that ruins everyone's day. And what I mean by that is, you know, you hit this final curb on the exit and powering through, upsets the rear, maybe hits a bump stop. It's very easy to loop your car through this section, and the walls, they're pretty close on both sides. So let's take a look at this complex then. So we take the curb. Again here, also just smoothly take it to not for anything else other than to try to straighten out that approach to the next apex here. And what I try to do is just give it like as if you're riding up the curb, right? Don't want to crash it, so you want to even like transition onto the curbing as opposed to like really upsetting the car going hard through the curbing. Again, this is the corner that will make your car spin by upsetting the car. And for me, I've definitely have experienced it through this complex, and I have heard many occasions where, you know, the rear strut, you can just hear it crash and go bang from hitting the bump stops. So once you get clear of this apex, we're going to be transitioning back on power and you know, touching the curb here, avoid the grass, and back onto the front straight. So as you're going through a track day, you know, this is a pretty important complex where you're basically exploring at what point can I essentially go wide open throttle and carry it through the entire section. I think with my car, I'm usually you know, back on throttle here, but I'm not wide open. I'm going to be partial throttle until I take this apex, and right around here is where, you know, when tires are heated up is where you can pin it and get through. But listen to what the car is telling you. If you're approaching this corner and it feels like it's transitioning too much or it's not gripping up, just consider not going completely wide open, because the tendency is actually to track out and get grass, and you want to avoid the grass, especially with the rear outside tire. I find just a tiny lift will help me get a little bit more steering response in the front of the car and allow me to keep it on the track. So keeping it on track is more important than getting that lap time. And you're gonna hit start finish, you know, somewhere around here. So this lap time 1:38.5. I think the car probably has a mid-high 36 in it. Under one, better driving, and then two, just a fresher set of tires than what was on the car at this time. So that is one lap of Mosport DDT with the 2 kink configuration. And I will play a uninterrupted lap now, so that you know, you don't have to hear me babbling. Thanks for watching.